I'm honored and very pleased to introduce Professor Allison, a distinguished scholar. Professor Allison was the Dean of the Kennedy School at Harvard, was Assistant Secretary of Defense for Policy and Plans, and until recently the Director of the Belfer Center at Harvard University. Of course, Professor Allison is well known for his work in foreign policy and decision-making, and it will not be an exaggeration to say that he is one of the most influential scholars of decision-making, national security, and foreign policy. Professor Allison will talk for about 20 minutes, then I'll talk for about 15 minutes, and we'll open it to questions. So, Professor Allison, please.
So thank you very much, and thanks for coming this afternoon. I look forward to this discussion. I pretty much have in mind what I think, having written the book. You can read it and argue with it. I'm much more interested in hearing some competing and contrary views, especially since I think Professor Mintz has taken this topic and pushed it a little further, and some of you, in trying to make use of these concepts, may be going even further. But in any case, it's an opportunity for me to walk back through the topic. I hadn't looked back at the book for some time and hadn't been thinking about the subject for a little bit, but looking back at it, I think it's a fascinating undertaking. So I'll take about 5 minutes to remind you of kind of where I come from with the three models. And then I'll take about 5 minutes or so to see whether these models or conceptual frameworks can do some work for us in thinking about what just happened on Tuesday, President Trump's decision to nix the Iranian nuclear agreement. And then I'll take about 5 minutes to pose some questions about whether you may be able to use these three frameworks or some other ideas you have to illuminate the decision of the Israeli Prime Minister, Netanyahu, particularly in his recent television spectacular, to try to push President Trump to the decision that President Trump ultimately made. So that's the game plan. Let me start here. So this is just a cartoon with respect to decision-making and the caricatures that the bureaucrats have about the professionals and vice versa. Yes, good. So some of you are probably familiar with Wittgenstein's puzzle. So what do we see here? What do we see?
Either a rabbit or a duck.
So how many people see a rabbit?
I could see both.
And how many people see a duck? Okay, so you probably have more ducks here than rabbits. In any case, this is needed. This is just some scratching on the paper, obviously. But what Wittgenstein was explaining to us is that when we see something, so we have some impression, our interpretation of it is impacted not simply by what happens to be there, but also by the conceptual frameworks in our head that sort what we're seeing and give it meaning or interpretation. So some of you are familiar with the phenomenon of Polaroid lenses. How many people have Polaroid lens glasses? How many don't? Oh, yikes, okay. You guys are missing a lot. Okay. So, how many people here are fisher persons, men and women? This is terrible. You guys are missing fantastic opportunity. There's a lot of fishing off the coast, right here, close by. Right. So if you're a trout fisherman, as I am, you go up to a stream. And if you happen to be wearing ordinary sunglasses, this is what you see. And particularly if you're looking for fish, this is difficult because can you see the fish in the water? No. So this is the same picture read through a pair of Polaroid lenses. So what are Polaroid lenses? You can buy them just at the shop. Polaroid lenses are lenses that cut the glare by excluding certain wavelengths, whereupon you can look into the water. So again, conceptually, think of looking at the world through ordinary eyes, or alternatively, putting on a pair of lenses, like Polaroid lenses, in which you can see more deeply into a situation. So, conceptual models or frameworks are an attempt to provide you some lenses that help you look more deeply into the situation that might be a government, the Trump administration, deciding to do what the president announced, or the Israeli government choosing what it decided, or any conglomerate actor. So in Essence of Decision, I lay out 3 alternative conceptual models. A rational actor model, organizational process model, and a governmental politics model. And you can read about them, so I'm not going to talk about them here, only to remind us that from high altitude, big picture, I look at a government as if it was a unitary actor, and I see it making a value maximizing choice. That's what it decides. So President Trump chose to nix the Iranian nuclear deal because he thought this was the value maximizing option for solving the strategic problem that he thought he faced, or maybe the same thing. Model 3, to jump to the bottom, which is easier to understand in contrast with Model 1, says no, that's partially true, but if we look more deeply into the water, we see not one unitary actor, but a number of individuals who actually have competing views, both about what to be done, nix it or fix it, or alternatively, even about what the problem is that they're solving. So Model 3 says what happens is the resultant, not the choice, of competing views bargained out among the players that share power. And Model 2, which is conceptually a little more difficult to get your head around, is called the organizational process model, says existing organizations and their routines, their standard operating procedures, shape the menu of options among which leaders choose in the first case or the third case. So this is now another level deeper. I'm not going to spend time on it here, but simply to remind you that in each of these conceptual frameworks, there are 20 ideas, not one idea. So you can get a gestalt. Model 1 is a unitary actor making a rational choice, but actually it's a lot more complicated than that. And both here in terms of the actor, but in terms of the action of the determining process, you can see a number of concepts. Even more so in Model 2, where there are probably 20 ideas, many of which you may not be familiar with, but which, if you've worked in an organization, you'll be more familiar with. And I would say each of these you can go look into for yourself. All of these are in Essence, so there's nothing new here. And for a practical way of making use of this, I'm not sure if this is in Essence or not now, but I use this for teaching sometimes. If you were just doing a Model 1 or Model 2 or Model 3 analysis, you take each of these questions and for the issue, work your way through the answers, you'll have a pretty good first approximation answer to the question, what did President Trump choose, if I'm trying to explain, or if I were doing this last week, what will he choose? And similarly, what did Prime Minister Netanyahu do, or next week, what will he do? So that's Essence of Decision in 5 minutes. Okay, no, one more here. So in the revised edition of Essence, this is related to Professor Mintz's work. today, so I'm just referring this to you. I looked back at the question, this is now when it was revised, this is like, I don't know, 30 years on. What else has happened in the meantime in the area of group decision-making that helps advance the topic, especially with respect to Model 3? And the answer is a lot, but the number of predictions that one can extract from the work that's gone on in the meantime are few. Because group decision-making processes are extremely complicated. So as I say here, in essence, government decision-making is a complex, multi-participant process. About this descriptive fact, there can be no question. The more difficult issue is what particular characteristics of multi-person decision processes have consequences for the content of the decisions and actions that emerge. And as I say, this is a frustrating question. So I then discuss the work that's gone on in many fields under 7 topics. Each one of those has a pretty elaborate discussion, each one of which offers some new ideas that are somewhat helpful in trying to understand complex decision processes. But in the end, the line is it's complex. So if you imagine a multi-person, non-zero sum game and try to model it in game theory, you find no determinate solutions. That's very frustrating if one's trying to do theoretical academic work. But in the real world, that seems fairly realistic. So quite hard to get from this additional complexity to insights that do work for the purposes of explanation and prediction. But we may want to come back to that in the discussion. So that's so much for introduction. Let me take a couple of more minutes to first apply this in the case of President Trump's decision announced on Tuesday, and then at least to raise a couple of questions which perhaps Professor Mintz will answer, or some of the other of you about the Israeli government. So, President Trump on Tuesday announced that he was withdrawing from the Iran nuclear agreement, which had been reached in 2015, as a result of which an Iranian nuclear program that had been less than a year away from Iran's first bomb was rolled back to 10 to 15 years away from that program. And President Trump said, I'm voiding the agreement, I'm collapsing the agreement, because it is not successful in dealing with Iran's nuclear challenge. So he gave a speech, you can look at it on YouTube, in which he argues that in contrast to dealing with Iran's nuclear challenge, or postponing it for some decade or more, the agreement had actually, as Bibi likes to say, paved the way to Iran's nuclear bomb, because Iran has been known to be a cheater in the past, and so it must be cheating now. And in any case, the agreement, he said, was not preventing Iran from getting a bomb, and he believes his alternative, he says, will do that. So let's go back. Can you go back? No, further back. Yeah. Is that back? Previous, when will that? Here we go. So in Model 1 terms, he says, here's a strategic problem, Iran's nuclear challenge, my value maximizing choice is to nix the deal, and he announces that. Well, if we think about this for a second, though, in Model 3 terms, so who agrees in the US government that withdrawing from the Iran nuclear agreement is the best way to deal with Iran's nuclear challenge? Well, John Bolton, the new National Security Advisor. But what about his predecessor, H.R. McMaster? No. He thought this was a good way to deal with the current Iranian nuclear challenge. How about the Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis? No. He thinks the Iran nuclear agreement is a good way to deal with this challenge. His views and Israeli Chief of Staff Eisenkot's views are Tweedledum and Tweedledee, on the same page. So, Tillerson, who used to be the Secretary of State, he thought this was a good way to constrain the nuclear program. Pompeo is standing on one foot and the other, and he's new to the job, so he's pretty careful not to get too far away from Trump. So if you go through the players who participated in the decision in Model 3 terms, you can see some significant differences, and therefore the puzzle arises in Model 3 terms. Who was solving which problem? What were their preferred choices? And then how do those get aggregated in this competitive bargaining process? Model 2 in this case is complicated but does some interesting work. So Model 2 reminds us that the options that governments choose among are options that are defined by the organizational procedures that can produce a capability with some constraints. So if it were possible for the US to know that Iran was not cheating and not getting closer to a nuclear bomb through American intelligence and Israeli intelligence and international intelligence and the inspectors that have been imposed on the case, if you have that capability, you have one situation to deal with. If that capability were more limited, you would have a different situation. Well, since in this case you have a very extensive capability to determine with high confidence that Iran has not been making progress towards a bomb, but has actually been pushed back significantly, the fact then that other players in the government override that evidence gives you more reason to wonder about what they thought they were doing, or whether they appropriately appreciate the situation. To take a second organizational capability that will become relevant right now. So President Trump says that as an alternative to the nuclear agreement, he's going to return to a maximum pressure sanction regime of the sort that existed before the agreement. Question: does the US government have the organizational capability to produce such a sanctions regime, since it requires actions by China and Russia and Europe, none of whom are enthusiastic about what President Trump announced? So again, analyzing that capability today would give you much insight into what's going to happen tomorrow, the next day, the next day. That's just once over lightly using the three frameworks for these purposes. Let me conclude then with questions about Prime Minister Netanyahu, whom I find about as puzzling as I'm sure you find President Trump, whom I also find puzzling. So, what does Bibi think he's up to, okay? Especially with respect to this television extravaganza? So, as Amos Yadlin said rightly, he had an audience of one. Donald Trump. Okay. Seems to have been pretty well tailored to his audience, who's a television addict and likes drama and a little bit of magic show, even if you pull a blanket off of some pile of papers that don't show anything. In any case, it was pretty well done. Pretty well done. So, President or Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government, Model 1, what is the strategic challenge Israel faces? Well, at least Bibi used to say, and the Israeli barony, security barony says, the only external existential threat to Israel would be an Iran with nuclear weapons. And that's qualitatively different than any other external challenge Israel faces or would face, or could face. Well, if that were the problem, then this is not the value maximizing choice. So that makes me suspicious about that characterization of the problem. If I had a different characterization of the strategic threat, which was an Iran which could ever have nuclear weapons, is an unacceptable threat to Israel. Or alternatively, another description would be an Islamic Republic of Iran. That is, this regime, if I believe that was the equivalent of the Nazi regime in the 1930s, then nothing other than the destruction of this regime would satisfy Israel's security requirements. So now, choosing to push Trump to collapse the nuclear deal, which will have the predictable effects of either getting Iran back on track to a nuclear bomb, so making it more dangerous in the short run, but nonetheless will provide maybe the provocation for attacking Iran, or for the Americans attacking Iran, or maybe even for invading Iran. So maybe even changing the regime. So you can play with that in Model 1 terms, push it down to Model 3, and you can imagine different players in the Israeli government having this same conversation. So what is the strategic problem we face? And then among those, what is our value maximizing choice? And then, given that we have differences of view, how would we resolve them? So when Bibi and Barak were in office together in 2010, 11, 12, repeatedly, both of them were in favor of attacking Iran then. But who was against attacking Iran then? Mayor Dagon. He said that was the stupidest idea I ever heard. That's what he said in public. The head of Mossad, the chief of the Israeli military. No, I don't think this is a good idea. So they were never able to get even a majority in their security cabinet. Now that the players have been rearranged in the current arrangement, again, I'll just leave this as a question. Bibi can pretty much command a majority, I think, if he wants. Because he pretty much does have people who would agree with him. Not all of them, but pretty much who would agree with him. In which case, the Model 3 game gets resolved by something like your groupthink. So that's enough to just stir the pot, and I'll look forward to more conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Professor Allison, for this fascinating analysis. A few months ago, actually 15 months ago, here, Dr. Matthias, Professor Wertzberger were in the audience and others in the book launch that I did here on campus and then at the George Washington University. I presented this talk about intra-group dynamics in the Trump administration, implications for US foreign policy, and I've expanded it a little bit today to talk about also Iran, Israel, and several other countries. But it's based on the Polything Syndrome, published by Stanford University Press. Several students here know about this book, which was written with Carly Wayne, introducing the concept of polythink. and it applies it to 11 decisions of the US administration to enter or exit wars in the Middle East, Afghanistan, enter and exit Iraq, Syria, ISIS, and the Kerry peace proposal. So, groupthink is the leading concept of group dynamics, and I will not talk about it. Most of you are familiar with it. In Israel, we are all familiar with the Yom Kippur War, 1973 strategic surprise, which was a groupthink assessment before the war of a low probability of an Egyptian and Syrian attack on Israel. In the book, when we introduce polythink, we talk about essentially the opposite of groupthink. It's a decision-making dynamic where different members in the decision-making unit, such as the cabinet, inter-circle, National Security Council, or other group, express disagreements, even dissent, and are involved in intra-group conflict, leaks, framing, and lowest common denominator decisions. And it can result in decision paralysis and suboptimal decisions. As Professor Allison just told us, group dynamics and group processes have an effect on decisions and outcomes. Our thesis is that any group can be placed on a group dynamic continuum, running from most cohesive, which is groupthink, to polythink, which is the least cohesive. On the left side is the non-concept of groupthink, great conformity. On the other extreme is great disunity, polythink. And in between, there is the convive, which is convergence-divergence, which is the middle range, a more balanced dynamic where the leader of the group sets up an overall direction for the group and articulates a vision, but members of the group, they have their own ideas. Sometimes there is plurality of ideas and decisions, but under conduct, the leader typically solicit information from group members, and it should lead to higher quality decisions. And we give in the book a few examples. We also list symptoms of groupthink, polythink, and conduct. And this is essentially a checklist for scholars and policy analysts for identifying the group dynamic, and it can be applied not only foreign policy, national security, but also marketing, sales, R&D, finance, military, government, jury, and so on. The group, whether it's a groupthink, polythink, conduct, or other configurations. Symptoms of group dynamics, I will not repeat a groupthink because this is well known, but on the polythink, it's intra-group conflict, leaks, confusion and lack of communication, framing and counter-framing, which you mentioned, adopting lowest common denominator, resulting in decision paralysis, limited review of policy options, and no room for reappraisal because there is so much conflict and disagreements within the group. While condive, convergence, divergence, think about it. Setting a vision, for example, for the state of Israel, but then having a plurality of opinions on how to resolve issues. There is a clearer policy direction than polythink, fewer group information processing biases, less likely to ignore critical information, operating in one voice, and so on. Okay, on the other hand, too much harmony may hinder real debate. So, this presentation, as I mentioned, was presented 15 months ago, a year and 3 months ago. And the question that I asked them was, how will the individuals picked for national security and foreign policy together work in the new administration? How will it impact US foreign policy? So the larger group at that time, I argued, which is the bureaucracy, the Washington bureaucracy, the inner circle of advisors, cabinet members, the Justice Department, intelligence agencies, and so on, they operate in a polythink environment. This was 15 months ago. There are leaks, intra-group conflicts, framing, counter-framing of information, fake news, war between intelligence agencies, and so on. But the inner circle, we argued, the inner circle that makes decisions on foreign policy, we placed them, it was difficult to place them at that time on the groupthink, polythink continuum. On one hand, the background and experience of many members of the national security team is quite similar, and Trump is influential and charismatic, so making it more susceptible to groupthink. There were also some strong personalities, Pence, Mattis, Pompeo, McMaster, that are not afraid to pick up their minds, but what we argued essentially is, this was 15 months ago, that there will be replacement of advisors, cabinet members, and others to form a team of loyalists, which is expected during the tenure of the administration. So this was the main prediction of the talk at that time, that it will move from a polythene style to more groupthink dynamic. So, and reverse engineering Trump's decision on foreign policy and national security, he said that there is essentially, there are positions that are admission tests, have to pass an admission test for joining the administration. Remember, this was the time of confirmations and so on. So each cabinet or advisor on foreign policy had to share some positions, or the same positions on radical Islam and ISIS, Iran, Iranian decision, ballistic missile tests, Iran's ambitions in the Middle East, US-Russia relations, Israel, China. And the Trump's chosen foreign policy advisors were all veterans, senior military and political professionals with strong ties to the military and the Washington bureaucracy, top national security generals, members that are conservatives, and he had little interest in reaching out to the traditional Republican elite. At that time, we argued that Trump's team is susceptible to some key and known groupthink symptoms. They share, as I mentioned, the same background, more or less. They have similar political worldviews. Few come from the Republican Party or Republican establishment, and the team is led by a charismatic leader who rewards loyalty. But because of the strong personality of some of the appointees, fights over policy are expected. This was 15 months ago, and potentially leading to clashes, but within the general groupthink framework. So, this was 15 months ago, and now what we see is that, as predicted, Trump's national security and foreign policy, by the way, when I presented it, a lot of people did not talk with me. They did not like the talk. And when I even gave it in other places, Council on Foreign Relations and so on, in Washington, D.C., they kind of debated it. But as predicted, Trump's national security and foreign policy team indeed exhibits now symptoms, in my opinion, of groupthink. Professor Allison, I want to hear his view, because the Pence, Bolton, Pompeo, Mattis, Kelly, and Haley share more or less the same views on Iran, Israel, North Korea, China, and so on. There are differences, as you pointed out. Mattis does not, he thinks that the three major problems of Iran, in the Middle East are, or of national security challenges of the US are Iran, and Iran, but he wanted to keep the agreement, the nuclear agreement. And notice this, in announcing the firing of Secretary of State Tillerson, Trump told reporters that the differences with Tillerson came down to personal chemistry and disagreements on policy, which is politics, and that he is appointing Pompeo because he has a very similar thought process as Trump. So this group is much more susceptible to groupthink. And it took a year or so, but Trump, who had indeed fired a number of advisors and cabinet members, built a team that tilts more toward groupthink. And I think within the national security and foreign policy team, this will be a rather stable team, in contrast to what happened until now. And that's risky to predict based on Trump's record, but I think these people he views them as loyal, and also that they share the same ideas and worldviews. And Casey Barr, a PhD student of mine at the university, we hypothesized at the ISA paper that politics in the decision unit is more likely to lead to status quo and continuity in foreign policy, whereas groupthink can lead to policy change. Because the charismatic leader with a groupthink decision unit can make changes in foreign policy and national security. While if you have a polythink, like in the Israeli cabinet, it's rather difficult. And we'll talk about it in a moment. So, in a groupthink-like structure and mentality, I claim that this has enabled Trump to change course on Iran, but it is conceivable that it's the opposite, actually. That Trump wanted and was determined to terminate the deal, as he promised in the campaign, and he selected Pompeo and Bolton to support the policy when he realized that Tillerson objected to it and not only to this. So I think, though, that with regard to a withdrawal from Syria, there were some projections and predictions yesterday and maybe before yesterday that the US is leaving Syria tomorrow. I think that there Trump will see that there is some opposition within the ultimate decision unit, because Pompeo and Bolton are not, in my opinion, will not share the view that withdrawing from Syria immediately and fully is the right thing for the US because of their view of Iran's ambition in the region. And they share, Mintz shares this view that Iran is expansionist and so on. So I think, although there are congressional elections and Trump, it's a big incentive for Trump to announce that a complete withdrawal from Syria of the US. I think the composition of the new national security team is such that it will not, I'm not saying it will not happen, but it will not be easy for the president to completely withdraw from Syria. I think at the minimum, air power is likely to stay there. And I think that's in contrast to most observers and analysts who predict that he will leave now completely and fully. We'll see. I think he constructed a decision unit that is built in a certain way on Iran, the nuclear deal, and to some extent on North Korea and other issues, and Israel for sure. We have, I'll refer to it in a moment. But on boots on the ground and air power in Syria, I think they view it differently. And that, I'm not saying the political incentive is huge for Trump because of the midterm congressional elections, but on the other hand, this trio within his small intimate decision unit will object to it. So there might be some compromise or some stage withdrawal or some other framing, as Professor Allison has mentioned in his book. Let's move on now to other countries, North Korea, Iran, Israel, and the Palestinians. And here, first of all, in terms of North Korea, okay, Kim had two options, or has two options. One is to continue with the nuclear program while challenging the US, South Korea, Japan, and others, or stop the nuclear program. Okay, so based on Professor Allison's well-known book, Essence of Decision, and the Rational Actor, I'm claiming that what Trump did is essentially change the cost-benefit of Kim. And how did he do it? He threatened to use force against North Korea in imposing sanctions, thus increasing the cost to Kim if North Korea continued with its nuclear weapons policy. At the same time, he also increased the benefits if they will comply, because the US and the world will lift sanctions and they will not attack, will guarantee that they will not attack North Korea. It was very interesting to notice that the first thing that the North Korea said in public was that, or South Korea, I'm sorry, that there was a kind of a promise that the US will not attack North Korea. So this is, in their mind, they viewed the threat that Trump made as a credible threat, And yet, see also the benefits, tremendous benefits, not to mention the effect that the impact the Chinese leaders had on them. So what I'm saying that by increasing on one hand the cost of Kim to continue the nuclear program, on the other hand increasing the benefits of halting this program, Trump essentially changed North Korea's calculus of decision. So that's, and it's an authoritarian regime, group think obviously prevails there, so policy shift is much more possible. You don't have the, like in the Israeli cabinet, security cabinet, all the forces that cancel out each other and compete over policy. So this is further supporting the theory that groupthink leads to policy change, can lead to policy change, while groupthink prevents policy change. Iran. And we'll contrast Iran to North Korea. Not all authoritarian regimes are created equal. In fact, they are very different on many parameters. Iran's leadership is characterized by a politic dynamic, I'll mention in a moment, and also a structure, politic structure, reformists versus conservatives, hardliners versus moderates, revolutionary guards versus Rouhani and Zarif. And what is the effect of politics, therefore, on foreign policy? I'm claiming that there is really a division of labor. I'm not the first to claim it, by the way, in the Iranian leadership. There is the spiritual leader, Khamenei, and he let Rouhani and Zarif take responsibility for the nuclear file, whereas the Revolutionary Guards are responsible for Iranian policy in the Middle East. And people don't realize those are two different bureaucracies, okay, and with very different agendas, plans, and ambitions, and politics, and constituencies, and relations with the supreme leader, and so on. The Republican Guard bureaucracy has its own agenda, as I said, ambition, plans, and they operate almost independently of each other when it comes to interests and plans. So this explains, in my opinion, that why thus far Iran has not given up its nuclear and expansionist ambitions. On the other hand, we know that in 2003, when Bush Jr., 43, attacked, the US attacked Iraq, apparently they halted the nuclear program, at least that was their declaration. The files that the Mossad brought to Israel have revealed it differently. But at least in terms of their ambitions, for sure they were not forthcoming in terms of revealing that. The Palestinians, moving to the Palestinians, they are obviously highly divided. Hamas challenges the Palestinian Authority, and I think, though, that in attempting to reach a peace agreement here, Trump took the right steps in the negotiations. I felt that when George Mitchell, Senator Mitchell, came here a long time ago, in the first Obama term, and started, the first thing that he said, you have to freeze settlements. This was, I knew immediately that the whole thing would collapse. Why? Israel is, the way that the Trump administration is looking at it from a business negotiation standpoint, Israel is the stronger partner vis-a-vis the Palestinians. And it has to make the concessions in terms of the territorial concessions, okay? So first of all, you don't push them on things that they don't like and immediately lose credibility. You actually build credibility and support among the most important consistencies. What I have in mind is that President Trump bolstered his credibility with Israel by declaring that the US embassy will be moved to Jerusalem, but more important, it gave him the support in the Israeli right. And this is very important for any concessions he will demand from Israel, and he will. So the trio, now I think this is amazing, because the trio, Pompeo, Bolton, and Haley, alongside Trump, is a dream team for Netanyahu. There is, if you would have to select out of hundreds of millions of Americans, 3 people for top positions in the U.S. administration, will select those would be top 3 or 4. For sure, Pompeo and Bolton. I'll just remind you who is Pompeo. When the U.S. signed the agreement, the West signed, the superpowers signed the agreements, the Europeans and the Chinese, Russians and the U.S. with China, with Iran on halting the nuclear deal. Pompeo, who was a congressman, I think from Kansas, and Cotton, from a senator from Arkansas, two young guys, they went to Vienna, okay, and they revealed and found out and uncovered secret, what they called secret deals, side deals, that John Kerry and the administration signed with the Iranians, okay, and on side deals that were not shared publicly with the US Congress and the public. And they made a big deal out of it. Eventually, their claim did not, they were unsuccessful in this. But this is a guy, together with Cotton, that are as close to Israel as possible in terms of their views. So I'm saying that Pompeo, Bolton, Haley, alongside with Trump, is a dream team for Netanyahu. You cannot get a better team than this. And it will have an impact on the peace process here because it will be all coordinated with Israel. So despite Netanyahu's declaration on a two-state solution, there has been no progress. And this is mainly because of the politics syndrome in the Israeli security cabinet. You have coalition partners and even Likud members subject to giving up territory in return for peace. If Trump will be able to provide Israel with some concrete and significant peace dividends from Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, and because of his credibility with Israeli right, he may persuade Netanyahu and Likud members to support at least partially a peace deal. I'm not saying it will be easy, I'm not saying it will be a complete one, but as long as Pompeo is the State Department and Bolton national security, even if one of them is there, the steps will be coordinated with Israel. I will not be surprised if there is even now some talk about what to do about it in very close coordination, because what is key is that Netanyahu not only feels very comfortable with these guys, with Bolton and Pompeo, he trusts them. He trusts them as very close allies, not only of Israel, but even of the Israeli right. So, in conclusion, intergroup dynamic is an important factor, as you mentioned, Professor Allison, explaining and predicting national security and foreign policy decisions of world leaders. For example, the shift from a team of rivals in the first Obama administration to a team of loyalists in the second Obama administration enabled President Obama to make the policy shift, signing the nuclear deal with Iran in 2015. There was no serious opposition, no contrarian view within the administration to sign a deal. I claim that if it would have been in the first term, with some of the players there, it would not have passed. With Axelrod and Rami Emanuel, and even even though Secretary Clinton was influential in operating behind the scene, opening the channel vis-a-vis the Iranians, I don't think that this particular agreement would have passed in the decision unit in the first term. In the second term, there were no contrarian views because the shift was to from team of rivals to team of loyalists, especially in terms of the overall ideology of the team, that conflicts should be solved in a peaceful manner, in a diplomatic way. I'm claiming that Obama's view is an extension of Luther King's view from the domestic arena to the international arena, and many people in the US support this view and appreciate it. But I'm saying that the composition of the decision unit in the second term enabled him to sign the agreement, and it would not have been signed, I think, as it was. John Kerry was very influential, and he massaged and created this architecture that eventually led to the agreement. I read the agreement, and there are hundreds of pages on, tens of pages on what Iran can do, even said export fistuki. But very few things about what the West can do and so on. And finally, the reversal of the reversal of the trend from a cabinet with some opposition to withdrawal from the Iranian deal to the new decision unit with Pompeo and Bolton helped Trump make the decision, as I said, from the Iranian nuclear deal. However, I believe that an overall and immediate withdrawal from Syria, Trump may face some domestic opposition within his own new decision unit, which is more sensitive to Iranians' role overall in the Middle East in general, and not just about the nuclear program. So, to conclude, the composition of the decision unit and intra-group dynamics in this unit cannot be ignored in attempts to understand and predict foreign policy and national security decisions, especially, but not only in democracies.
Right here. I lived part of the time here, part of the time in the United States. Professor Allison, I loved your talk, but the thing that bothered me was I kept thinking back to Alan Greenspan, who, when he was chair of the Fed, advocated the idea that businessmen are very much rational and therefore can be counted on to make rational decisions. And then when everything fell apart in 2007 and 2008, basically he said, whoops, I was wrong. And applying it to our discussion of President Trump, what concerns me is I see somebody who is not at all a rational figure. And we're talking about a decision-making paradigm when his decision-making paradigm seems to be, does it appeal to the 30% of Americans who are his base? And that seems to be the basis of all his decisions, not foreign policy implications and so on.
Well, okay, so can everybody hear the question? So what about Trump and rational decision-making? So, answer complicated, yes. So, and I don't know the answer. I think we underestimate Trump, and especially since I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is a deep blue bubble in which people cannot imagine Trump could do anything right. I keep reminding people, even a broken clock is right twice a day. So the fact that Trump holds to a view doesn't make it wrong. And the fact that Trump has become president was not an accident. So this would be a long analysis of what is Trump and who is Trump. But I would say we should not underestimate him. And I believe that he has objectives which he pursues in a manner that is rational in the sense of value maximizing for the values that he wants to maximize. So as I have in the book a description of Model 1, if somebody has objectives that you don't think are sensible and behaves in a rational, calculating way to achieve those objectives, you may say, well, that's not rational, I wanted that, but that's what he wanted and that's what he did. And that helps you see why he chose A versus Z. Similarly, if he appraises a situation different than the way you do. So when you look at a situation and you say, if I make people extremely uncomfortable, and by making the whole situation unpredictable in a manner in which it might even explode, that's going to have negative effects, because I know my mother told me that's a bad way to do it. And lo and behold, he looks at his experience, and he says, No, often if I can make people feel very uncomfortable and the situation unpredictable and dangerous, lo and behold, they give me what I want. Okay? So maybe that's his experience. So I would say that we should not, I don't think that underestimate this method of mismanagement. The person didn't get the nomination against 16 seasoned Republican heavies with no skills or no counter. And he didn't then beat Hillary with no skills and no counter. Now, that doesn't mean that he necessarily is pursuing the objectives the same way you or I would, and doesn't mean that he's going to be successful, because he may well have the view that international politics works like The Apprentice or some other situation that he's had in, or some real estate deal. And I would say, looking at history, there's some irregularities that I would say, look for a little more method in the methods. And the method is purposive, I believe.
Thank you. First of all, thank you both for really fascinating presentations and very important work. My name is Dr. Shabib Matis, and I'm former Deputy Attorney General of Israel, so I had my fair share of cabinet meetings. I am now with the IDC, very happy to be here. My question is now to Professor Alex Mintz. I think you described the Israeli decision-making process, and I have to say I have seen it firsthand, as a polythink type of decision-making process in many respects. I am wondering, with the new legislation which allows the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense to make decisions on going to war, which is maybe the most important decision one can think of in terms of the viability of the country, would that change your view as to the type of decision-making process that we are looking at now? And what do you think the implications would be? Thank you.
I think if at all it will be applied only to severe or irregular cases, but if it will, and I doubt, I think members of the cabinet, the security cabinet, and the overall government are unhappy with this. But I think when we analyze in the book, based on your piece in the New York Times, actually, we said that there are three components, or three groups, in making the decision on whether to attack Iran or not. The Israeli political echelon, Barak and Netanyahu, the military defense system overall with the Mossad and others, Chief of Staff, of course, and the US administration. And we noticed that two of the three were against it, okay? And this was sufficient. I mean, what we said, that if it would have been 2 out of 3 the other way around, the two would have supported in 2012 an attack, and vis-a-vis Iran, then it would have changed the formula. So there were 3 groups, 2 of them opposing and 1 in favor. Today, with Yossi Cohen, the head of the Mossad, who views the Iranian threat very, very seriously, with Lieberman in power, and so on, and the US administration, on the other hand, is viewing Iran as a major threat. I think the Iranians should be a little bit more careful now in their next steps. Okay, we see that Eisenkot and the IDF are very determined not to let them take a hold in Syria. And I think the whole composition of the decision unit in Israel and the United States is very different. So the default will be to do something rather not to, unless Iran behaves. That's not to say that this is going to happen or happen tomorrow, because we need to see what the Iranians will do, of course, vis-a-vis significant move by the Trump administration. To answer your point more directly, I'm against the view that two people will decide whether to go to war or not. I also think it's very complicated to ask the entire government to approve such an important decision. But this is why you have a security cabinet with 7, 8, 9 members, and that's the right forum. In Israel, though, typically the Ministry of Defense, the IDF, they introduce their preferred choice, and the rest comply, more or less in history. But it may change now. It may change. The balance of power within the cabinet vis-a-vis the defense is right now more hawkish. In fact, in Israel, the generals are much more restrained than the politicians.
Let me mention one, if I can, about that, because it's an excellent question, and trying to understand the disaggregated decision process in different countries can give you some insight, if you think about it comparatively. So in the US, this topic was deliberated by extremely thoughtful people at the time the Constitution was created. And you can read about it in the Federalist Papers, which are brilliant, brilliant. And they came to the view that the idea of allowing one person to decide to make war made no sense. That was part of the problem that they had with King George, whom they were rebelling against. So they declare in the Constitution completely, clearly, and unambiguously, only Congress has the power to declare war. Now, wait a minute, so you're going to give the power to declare war to 435 people? Yes, they said, because this is a decision the country has to make. So if you're going to go take the country into war, in which then the citizens are going to kill and be killed, this big decision. So that's at least what the Constitution says. Unfortunately, that's been eroded entirely in terms of the operations of the U.S. government today. So today, one king can decide, all by himself. And so if Donald Trump decides to attack somebody, we go. So that's the circumstance. And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu had looked at that extremely frustrated. He was, because I studied this and wrote this piece that he mentioned in 2010, 11, and 12, wanting to attack Iran and couldn't persuade the other members of his national security group to do that. So he liked this move to a smaller group. It's defined as under extreme circumstances, but then the question of who gets to interpret what means extreme circumstances. If I get to decide, now we're still back to one or two people deciding. So I think, unfortunately, that's a very dangerous move in the direction of the American government, which I also think is very dangerous, not just under Trump, but under Obama or under anybody else. I think the Federalists had a much better idea.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Fascinating presentation. Professor, you invited contrary views. I'll be happy briefly to provide one.
Please.
I am a recovering politician. I was on a city council in the United States. I ran for the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate and had the good sense to lose in 2006 from New Mexico. I'm now an Israeli. That was good sense. I grew up in and around New York and conducted business in and around New York businessmen. You stated, I heard the statement that Trump is puzzling and Bibi is puzzling. I failed to catch the humor in it, but then again, I'm not on that side of the political spectrum. So I'll try to explain a little bit of what the puzzle may be. Donald Trump is a New York businessman. He doesn't speak well, he speaks bluntly. He doesn't speak accurately, he speaks forcefully. He doesn't speak elegantly, he speaks honestly. This is difficult for the people who did not win that election to accept, by and large, but it's true. The way he makes decisions, I'm going to, Professor, take exception to your notion that he's got a group thing going. got rid of the people who disagreed with him, and now he's got people who agree with him, discounts the experience of Pompeo, Bolton, and Haley. Bolton has a very long track record in international relations. Trump is not someone who surrounds himself with yes men, he's someone who surrounds himself with strong men. That there is a conservative consensus among his advisors is not shocking. In the Obama administration, there was a progressive consensus around his advisors. These people are elected, they're expected to follow through on their electoral promises. However, excuse me, with all due respect to this gentleman, it diminishes significantly what the 30%, myself included, in the United States who voted for him and constitute his base, believe and can do. To say, oh, he's simply trying to satisfy his base. I have difficulty getting inside my own mind to figure out what my motives are, let alone what the President of the United States' motives are. So basically, the contrary view is, I see it as the convergence, it's not groupthink that I see going on in the White House. I see it as your common divergence, convergence situation going on. Direction is given. Get back to me, give me the yeses and the nos. I worked for the Corps of Engineers for a while. We were told, present the bad side, put it on the wall, throw darts at it, present the good side, see what we come up with. But the principle was always the same. In this case, this administration is conservative principles. It's America First principles. It's let the economy work principles. It's definitely support Israel principles. And so what I'm thinking is going on here is that my vision of Trump in the White House is, this isn't somebody who does not curry favor with people who disagree with him. He invites people who disagree with him, as you did, because he needs to hear the plus and minus. But he isn't going to waste a lot of time on it. He's going to make the decision. And I believe that's appreciated worldwide.
So I think it's very helpful to get another point of view, and I could go on at length about it, but I would give you a similar quote given that comes from Peter Thiel, who's American VC, and he says, the problem most people watching Trump have is that they take him literally, but not seriously. But in fact, you should take him seriously, but not literally. And I think that's a pretty good observation.
Yes.
Yes. Do I use a microphone? Is anything fixed here? Let's hope. Hello? Okay, good. I'll back up a little bit. Some of you know me. My name is Erin Bronstein. I'm a retired American Foreign Service officer. Served 30 years under many presidents, starting with Lyndon Johnson. Retired 22 years ago, early retirement, because I'm only 39 now. And have dealt with security policies both within the government and outside the government during election campaigns on the side. By the way, I'm a graduate of the Hebrew University, class of '63, and came on Aliyah for the second time 22 years ago. So that pretty places me within your generation, especially the generation of the students here. I think, and to follow up on what David had to say, I think one of the essential, this is really in the form of a question, one of the essential issues is going to be to what degree can there be thinking outside of the box with regard to the major issues confronting America, the world, and Israel? Is there some way to judge the degree to which a group dynamics, whatever we call it, on the spectrum, can deal with the issue of thinking outside the box? I'll give you two examples. And these are examples I'm working with, both vis-a-vis the Netanyahu government and vis-a-vis the Trump government, through the Congress and through other points of access. I'll give you an example with regard to Iran. Maybe the issue now was not a nuclear Iran or a non-nuclear Iran. maybe the issue was, as you alluded to, how do we stop Iran, period? How do we get the Ayatollahs to go back into their rat holes? And not to wait and be paralyzed, especially the Europeans, for 7 more years. You know, I know for the younger people here, 7 years is a long time, but I can promise you it is a very short period of time. How do you get them, how do you get the Europeans especially to stop their paralysis vis-a-vis the aggressive efforts of the Ayatollah regime for world domination, starting with the Middle East? And they got Arabia surrounded. So are you going to get the Europeans to cooperate in stopping them dead in their tracks? I would propose psychological warfare, not to avoid hot military conflict. And therefore, I believe that in the Trump administration, the new Trump administration, the new White House administration, there was a realization that there is a degree of paralysis in the world because of the agreement. What? You want to jeopardize the nuclear agreement by attacking Iran? And the issue 3 years ago was not, do you want nuclear sanctions or do you want a nuclear agreement or do you want war? The issue was, and not recognized by those who fought for the agreement, do you want a nuclear agreement or do you want double sanctions, triple sanctions? Do you want to paralyze the Iranian regime? And I'll give one more example, North Korea. Well, it takes a second. North Korea, everybody thinks, thinking outside the box, that the issue in North Korea is denuclearizing the peninsula. I propose that under certain circumstances, denuclearization of North Korea can be a threat to the entire East Asia, and I served in Vietnam, among other places, if it involves removal of the tripwire of American troops, American presence, and reduces the probability of tactical nuclear weapon use. So how do you factor in to this analysis the degree that a group can think outside of the box? Thank you.
So thank you very much for, I think, the proposition of, as you know, having worked in government over many, many years, trying to get the government to think outside of the box is extremely hard. Even, obviously, for individuals. We're very accustomed to thinking of things the way we think of them. In dealing with major national security threats, and I could discuss each of them, but I'll say about the Iranian one, what I think. It's possible that the Islamic Republic of Iran is itself, given its ideology and its kind of version of a theocracy of sorts, a threat to Israel and to American interests in the region and the world. And so we should think of it like the Nazis, or we should think of it like Soviet communism on the march during the Cold War. And it's not until the evil empire is destroyed that we can declare success. I'm an old American Cold Warrior. I worked very hard during that period. I worked happily in the Reagan administration to try to bury the evil empire. I actually went to watch the hammer and sickle come down over the Kremlin on Christmas Day 1991, thinking it was something I would never have the opportunity to see in my lifetime, and I think was a fantastic success story of American strategy. That strategy did not include going to war with the Soviet Union.
Absolutely.
It had a Cold War, as you know, that went over 4 decades and was in all forms of competition except bombs and bullets, on the grounds that a real hot war would have been too destructive and that there were alternatives. So I believe that we will look back, unfortunately, on the decision President Trump made on Tuesday, and that Bibi has been pressing this administration and the previous administration very hard to try to make as a huge mistake. I believe that the analysis in Mossad and the analysis in the general staff here, the analysis of General Eisenkot, and you can just go talk to and ask what he thinks. He's not shy at all about his views, are solid, sound, thoughtful. I think those are the same views at the Defense Department today. Those are the same views at the CIA today, by professionals. So they may be wrong, and maybe we need to go beyond that box, and maybe just stopping Iran's nuclear program for 10 to 15 years, which is all the agreement did, and using that 10 to 15 years to work on all the other problems is not enough, and not the best way to go. And we should just go back to where we were before and ask, how does that play out? And it's, I would say there's one chance in several hundred, not 1 in 100, but it's 1 in several hundred, that lo and behold, some good thing comes out of this. So I'm always for a miracle, I'm always hopeful. But if I ask myself, what is the most likely outcome of this? I think we'll end up having a bigger divorce between the Americans and the Europeans on this. It's not going to buck up the Europeans if that was your problem, but that was the worry. And I suspect that you're going to then see a replacement of the Rouhani crowd with the people in Iran, a very substantial group of people who thought reaching any nuclear agreement was stupid. We should get ourselves a nuclear bomb as fast as we can. And so then either you're going to end up with somebody attacking Iran, and if we end up attacking Iran, you maybe end up with somebody invading Iran, and if you start invading Iran, I think for those who like what the U.S. did in Iraq after 2003, they're going to love Iran, okay? But I think it was stupid what we did in Iraq. I think we're $5 trillion and 5,000 dead Americans and many, many thousands others worse off than we were before. And since this, I don't know if you were in the earlier morning discussion, in the big geopolitics of things, all of this while, there's emerged this huge other player in the world. So not everything happens in this region. There's now a country that's as big and strong as the U.S. It's called China. The China-U.S. axis is going to be the dominant axis of politics for the life of the younger people here. And you're going to see its gravitational effects everywhere. So I'm concerned about not only getting outside the box and doing something dumb, but also the opportunity cost that represents in terms of other things that need to be done for a secure world. That's a long speech.
Can you give me 1 second comment on that? Yeah, just 1 sentence. I think to go back to the thinking that existed at the time that the nuclear agreement was being discussed would be absolutely wrong. There needs to be a whole new thinking with regard to how to deal with Iran, and I'm proposing psychological warfare against them, and that has never been done in a way that has a chance of being effective. So it's not to go back to where we were 3 years ago, but to learn from 3 years lost, to come up with a policy that can achieve a change in Iran.
Somebody should describe that in detail and write it down.
It's written down. I give it to you after the meeting.
I'll just give you a brief challenge of what I see how Trump would think. All of the experts would say it's a great deal, you've got to keep it. They're complying. And Trump would lean back in his chair and say, well, they're complying with a bad deal. How can you call it a good deal if by agreement the inspectors can't get into military nuclear sites?
And I think, and if you ask General Eisenkot, he would give you a very good answer.
You have his cell number?
I do, but I'm not going to give it to you.
On the political front, Netanyahu has always remained substantially in terms of public opinion and support for his policy from 28 seats to 35. Of course, public opinion polls fluctuate and so on, but if one wants to maximize value on political capital, and especially before the election situation and so on, there is at least he gained a lot from this recent move. Yes.
One thing I would say, I'm not sure, the one thing in what you said I'm not sure is accurate, is I don't think I would compare the situation between America and Russia in the Cold War to the situation with Iran, where there maybe it could go on 40 years as a Cold War, because I think from a cultural or ideological outlook, what the Russians wanted to achieve or do is not the same as the Islamic regime. And the chances of them actually using these type of weapons, if they would get their hands on it, I think are much higher than what they would be, even if it meant a certain amount of destruction on their part, on their side as well. I think it's very different in that respect. So you said, yes, the Cold War could go on for 40 years. There was never a military situation or a war that came about. But I don't think it would hold that long if they got a nuclear weapon and there was some other way of dealing with it. That, okay, so we could have a Cold War type of situation, and now we're worse off. I think that that type of weapon in the hands of people with that type of ideology is not the same as being in the hands of people like Russia or China. And I think that the chances of them using it, even in the situation of man, which is sure destruction on both sides, is much higher. And just okay, so we'll lose a few more because that's the.
Look at India and Pakistan.
So we could have a long argument about this, which I would be happy to do on the side, but let me simply say, my proposition is not that letting Iran get a nuclear bomb is a good idea. It's a terrible idea. The reason why the agreement was so important was that it took a program that was less than a year away from a bomb and rolled it back to what Eisenkot says gives him a 12 to 14-year window to work on that problem, that is in the future, their nuclear ambitions, which they will never give up. Never give up. The idea that they should give up their nuclear ambitions, excuse me, I have an ambition to be immortal too, but how is that relevant? Not very relevant. So the fact they have an ambition, the fact that they have an ambition is one thing. The fact that they're doing something, making progress towards it, that's another thing. So they're going to have to be prevented from getting a nuclear bomb forever, I believe. Forever. Well, that's a long, long, long task. But in terms of their other ambitions, they also have unacceptable ambitions in the region. Those have to be countered for now and for a long time. They also have aspirations to build up their missile program. Those have to be countered for now. So that was the problem we were dealing with and we need to be dealing with. So the reason why I gave you as a Cold War analogy is in that case, without a hot war. So one possibility is to say the only way to deal with the Iranian regime is to have a hot war with them and change the regime. And actually, that's the view of John Bolton, okay, for example. So it's not a crazy view per se. I think it may be what Bibi thinks is ultimately the objective. So that's possible, but that's a view. I don't hold to that view, and Eisenkot doesn't hold to that view, and Mattis doesn't hold to that view. The alternative view would be we can stop their nuclear program, as we have now done for a 10 or 12 year period. That gives us some time to work on all these other bad things that they're doing. And if we think about the Cold War, this regime, which is a cockamamie regime in any case, and which doesn't have great appeal to most young, 80% of Iranians are less than 30, so these are young people that are normal people. They're not into this, whatever the ideology of the Iranian regime. So, can this regime be undermined? Your psychological warfare? No, I think maybe, yeah. So that's, I would say that's the task.
Well, the sanctions undermine the South African regime, ultimately. So if you say that there's a large number of people in the population, like people in South Africa, I'm from South Africa as well, that would support that because they wanted the regime changed, but the regime held on to power. Eventually, sanctions did that. So sanctions can help the people. It takes time.
One of the things that we need to take into account is also the involvement of third parties in this, especially Hezbollah. because when Dagan said that it's a stupid thing to do, one of the things that he had in mind, and also the top military echelon, was a retaliation, that the Iranians are equipping the Hezbollah with more than 100,000 missiles, and some of them are guided missiles and heavy, not just Qassam rockets and so on, but with GPS and so on, and that there will be heavy retaliation. However, this has changed somewhat because the Hezbollah is not in such a strong shape nowadays militarily. It's in a better shape politically, of course, but not militarily. And in fact, we need to hear what Nasrallah said, not just what he said, but what he did not say. When he said that, he essentially said recently that this thing now between Iran and Israel are their own business. That's what essentially he said. A few years ago, he would never said that. He aligned himself with Iran, and now capturing majority in Lebanon, and having suffered the casualties in Syria, and all the problems that Hezbollah has in terms of military operations and so on, and also the support of the US to the Israeli position that next time, if there will be a war with Lebanon, the entire Lebanon will be destroyed, not unlike in 2006. So this changes the calculus here vis-a-vis Hezbollah as well. And I know that Eisenkot, being the commander of the northern front in Israel, took very seriously Hezbollah's position and developed the Dahya concept and doctrine, essentially, but he may view the things now differently. Yes.
Okay.
This is our last question.
Okay, thank you. Not about nuclear now, a little bit. Wondering about Trump's decision to move the American embassy to Jerusalem, in reference to what you said is a plan for the Palestinians and the peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, or at least some talks. And somehow, by doing that, he renders himself, he puts himself outside of this game, for the Palestinians at least. And I was wondering, what are the reasons for his decision in this instance?
I think Professor Mintz had the most optimistic view, and actually I slightly subscribe to this, but I think in it, basically this has been a view pushed by the American-Israeli community and repeatedly passed by Congress, mostly members knowing that presidents will override it and not do it. So, I can get credit with my constituents to say I was in favor of it, and then Obama or Bush or Clinton, whoever happened to be president, will say, but this would be irresponsible to do, and so they don't do it, and so everybody's happy. And I think Trump comes from a different environment, and he did say in the campaign this is what he's going to do. It is about trying to fulfill his campaign promises. And so he said we're going to do this, and then he said, well, let's do it. And people said, yeah, but look at the negative consequences it's going to have for the Palestinians. And he thinks, well, the Palestinians are weak anyhow, and what have they done for me? So, okay, in any case, we're going to do it. Now, if you were looking at the positive, and I hope this is right, if this shores up his relationships on the right, he could come and lay down a plan that says, okay, here's 2 states, and that's it. You guys, done. I wish he would do that. I like Amos Shadlin's version of a so-called unilateral definition of 2 states. And I think if Trump would do it, and simply say, that's it. Okay? Here's the territory, here's the lines, be done. Bibi would probably have a heart attack. Because I don't think Bibi wants two states ever. But in any case, he would not have one place to go. So maybe that would be the optimist. I'm trying to find something to be optimistic.
That's very nice of you.
To answer your question, following what Professor Allison said, I think it's largely political vis-a-vis the evangelist community, the Jewish community in the US, and also his own constituencies. I think there is very high support, very strong support for moving the embassy to Jerusalem among those constituencies, among those groups. One
Can
other
I just
thing.
make just a short comment?
Please.
When you say the Jewish community in the United States, it's not a unilateral feeling at all.
That's a good.
And much of this kind of discussion also, or decision, splits the Jewish community even further.
I agree, for sure. Good point, especially something comes from Massachusetts. But the point is, I'd like to mention something about the European, US-Europe rift. I think that it's not as terrible as it looks, and it actually will move the other way around. In other words, the Europeans will view this as a strong and bold move, and companies, multinationals and others will be very concerned about having relations with the U.S. administration and the U.S. I already read in Bloomberg that several companies were thinking of selling to the Iranians canceled or are thinking of canceling the deals there. I think that multinationals and other strong companies in Europe will push their governments to actually adopt the U.S. position and renegotiate with Iran. Okay, rather than splitting and going. It was all before the choice and the decision that Trump made. But once he made the decision, I think the French will move into this direction. They probably will be the first, and others as well. My view is that it takes, as you all know, the U.S. is a huge battleship. It takes a long time to move into a certain direction. But when there is a presidential directive, okay, in the U.S., all the bureaucracies start with the Euro standard operating procedures and so on, and move into this direction. And the Iranians, this is one of the things. It started 2-3 months ago when the administration announced that Iran is a serious problem. And once it happened, all the bureaucracies and the agencies and so on move into this direction. So it's the Treasury and the state and many others who are, of course, in the administration. So you know how it works. Thank you very much.
Present again.